Okay, we're live.
All right. Good morning, Labor, Health and Social Service Committee. Welcome to the last day of House bills for 2023. We have 4 bills up for us this morning. The first one is going to be House Bill 245, so everyone's ready. But with that, Marilyn, if you'd call the roll.
Good morning. Representative Chadwick. Representative Clauston.
Here.
Representative Hornick. Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative Penn.
Here.
Representative Trujillo.
Here.
Representative Ward.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Here.
Thank
All
you.
right. And committee, I believe 3 of us have bills in other committees, so it might be a little spastic today of who we're going to play, who's going to be the chairman at any given time, because I know Representative Yin and I are both running around. So I think Representative Chadwick will stay here for the duration of the meeting, from what I understand. But if we had to leave, I'm not trying to be rude. It's just last day of bills and everyone's got stuff going on. But with that, please welcome House Bill 245, Court Ordered Placement Child Support, brought to us from Representative Provenza. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today I bring to you House Bill 245, amending child support for children in state custody. Currently, what our state law and process is that every time a child is taken into custody of the state, the court shall order child support. So that might mean children who are perhaps needing to be removed from the home for neglect purposes. That might mean they have been found delinquent, that they've been placed in the Boys and Girls School. It really is just every time that a child is removed that the court shall order child support. So as I'm sure that you can imagine, when child support shall be ordered in every case, there are scenarios where you can see this being harmful. Maybe an instance where an issue of the child is found that they didn't actually commit an offense. So they weren't found guilty of something, but families are still being ordered to pay. They might have a mental health crisis, and in that moment, law enforcement was involved. And because of that, then they're ordered. There's a variety of instances that we can think of. One Wyoming mom said that when the court took my son, not only did they take the child support his father paid me, they forced me to pay more support. Even after he came home, they billed my insurance too. Another single mom who was a janitor was charged $3,000 for her child's stay throughout a duration of time. Said, what did I just pay for exactly? It clearly didn't buy any kind of rehabilitation. So what this is doing is potentially placing a further burden on families. In instances where maybe even the parent is the victim in a case, parent is still going to be ordered to pay. There's so many different cases in which we aren't able to take anything into account because it is the court shall. So what this bill does is it is bringing that decision-making to the Department of Family Services, and in which they can take these things into account, and then they can decide whether it is appropriate or not to charge for child support. And if that is going to reunite families faster and rehabilitate. So to walk you through the bill briefly, what we see is there's several different sections that in Title 14 that we need to amend to bring us in line with this. So you'll have neglected children, children in need of supervision, and juvenile delinquent children. And so page 2, page 2 through page 4 pertains to children who have been taken into state custody through child protection actions. And really the main thing that you'll see throughout this bill is shall is stricken and may is inserted in its place. You'll go through and I believe on page 2, orders will still be established through separate civil action if ordered by the court. So also providing the ability for civil action to happen. pages 3, you'll see may in there multiple times. They contain mainly conforming amendments to the statute 14-3-435 to clarify procedures that will be used by the department and the court. In this case, the juvenile court may order support, but whether to do or do not, the department can also decide to pursue it. So still giving department the ability to do that. I believe on page 4 is where you will see some changes, the same changes to delinquency. So this is where the delinquency issues are. So page 4, line 19 through page 7 on line 10. Page 5, more conforming language. Page 7, lines 6 through 10 strikes language that is inconsistent with statutory purpose to address the child's safety first and foremost. So the fact that the parent may not have the financial ability to pay the state for caring for their child when the state is the one who is preventing them from providing care themselves is contrary to our effective child welfare practices. 14-6-429 deals with our CHINS cases. So these are children in need of supervision. So same changes here. And then on page 10, we'll see Title 21, which takes us to some of our education statutes. So this is conforming amendments under education. So that's on page 10, line 23, the language directing the court to determine what amount should be excluded from the child support for the child's education costs, which should be free because they are entitled to a free public education. So that responsibility is removed from the court. And then the section 3 on the last page is effective immediately if we pass this law.
Are there questions right now for Representative Provenza? Representative Penny?
Could you help me understand, like going back to page 4, or since we're on page 10, there's a section removed about asking parents to, I guess actually maybe it's not on page 10, but definitely page 4 at the bottom. Striking the language that asks them to seek full-time employment. Could you just help me understand what the thinking is behind that?
Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is just in light of, and I might defer to Donna Sheen here, who I've been working with and has been working closely with the department in drafting this language. But I think essentially trying to remove further any essential burdens on that the court is going to be placing on folks that might not make sense. So in cases where if we don't have, say the child goes back home, but they're still paying and they can't work full time because they have to provide childcare, that might be an issue. But certainly if Ms. Sheen would mind introducing
Or maybe before
herself.
I turn it over, anybody else have a question for Provenza, Representative Trujillo? Oh, your mic's on. I just
Oh, sorry.
making sure. All right, with that, welcome, Ms. Sheen. If you'd introduce yourself, any comments, and then as part of those, if you could answer Representative Penn's question.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Donna Sheen. I'm the director of the Wyoming Children's Law Center. We're a nonprofit that provides legal assistance to families who are often involved in juvenile court proceedings to help them through the process. And I am also a member of the Wyoming Youth Justice Coalition. Some of you may have heard me testify in other committees, but our work at the coalition is bringing together professionals and parents with lived experience to try and help promote necessary changes to our juvenile justice system. So with that, I would first just try and answer the question. I think part of what our rationale was in removing this language is that it's a difficult burden to place on the court. And if you've been involved in some of these court proceedings, if we're removing, the burden of the child support being always looked at by the Department of Family, by the court, what we believe is a better method, and Department of Family Services may comment on it, but would be to just allow that issue of whether the parent is employed or not to be worked on in the case plan. So if you have a family who's struggling maybe with substance abuse, that might be a goal of the case plan. And following the case plan through to the end is part of what the judge will be mandating. But it's, I think, something, and I've never even seen a judge order this, mainly because I think the judge wants to leave it to the department and their workers to really evaluate what the family, where they're at and what kinds of things should be put on their plate in order to address. So this just removes that, that need, which really isn't, I think, in my experience, being used.
Other questions, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman?
could I just follow up?
Yeah, Representative Penn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're saying that this was more of the court ordering that, but in your experience, does the case, did you call it case planning? Do they order this sometimes or plan for that?
Ms. Sheen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Penn, in my experience, I've never seen the court order this. And I think it's primarily because the court feels that the department needs to work with the family in a cooperative way and that ordering it isn't necessarily going to be beneficial at the time that the court's dealing with the issue. Certainly, department may be able to testify on times it may have been used, but I'm not aware of any. I do know, though, that if a parent isn't progressing, if it is in the case plan that the parent get appropriate housing, get, you know, a stable income so that they can take care of their child, that's generally written into the case plan. And then that progress on the case plan will be reviewed by the court and the court can take appropriate action, I think, at that point.
So Representative Hornock, did you have a question as well? Representative O'Hearn did. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you take out shall and may, what are some of the triggers or requirements to make the judge say you have to, or you shall, or you may? Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, what we anticipate is that DFS is going to talk a little bit about it, but it will essentially shift the burden to DFS and their child support division to establish policies about when they will. And I think they'll probably talk a little bit about some changes in federal guidance that has directed the department to not seek child support in certain cases where we know the research shows that we actually slow down reunification by placing additional financial hurdles for the family to be able to meet all the expectations we have in the case plan. So I think in the end, while the fiscal note said there was it was indeterminate, I anticipate that it's going to not be very often. There's going to be exceptions that where it makes sense, but that for the typical case, a parent is likely still going to have to pay child support.
Representative Chadwick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you know, could you tell us the genesis for this bill?
Sure. Ms. Sheen, go ahead.
Chairman Swanitz or Representative Chadwick. Absolutely. Our coalition has been working on a number of aspects of the juvenile court statutes that we see have the highest negative impact on families. In other words, they're just sort of counterproductive. They're not achieving what the state wants, and they're impacting families in a negative way, putting burdens on the family that it's a difficult time. And sometimes there's a lot of trauma happening in the family. Representative Provenza mentioned a family who was the victim. It was a young man with some mental health issues who had a physical outburst with the stepfather in a case I saw, where the situation, they called police for help, but it quickly escalated to the child being in the juvenile justice system, not at the request of the parent. And so being able to recognize those kind of situations and say, in this case, it's not going to be fair in order to help the family to impose that burden in addition as we work through what the child needs.
Yep, go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another kind of historical thing. So in 2021, the legislature considered fines and fees being increased for, I think, probation and parole. And the conversation at that time was, does this actually raise any revenue? Because what ultimately happens is that it ends up costing many states sometimes upwards of $4 for every dollar that they collect. And so we know that in the collection process, we don't necessarily have that information for Wyoming. At least to my knowledge, in conversations that I've had with Clint Haynes at DFS, I believe he had stated that it might be that the state of Wyoming pays substantially more than we collect by the time you get done with all of the procedures that go into place of collecting at the time and everything else. Other states have seen that sometimes it's upwards of $4 spent for every dollar they get back. And so in that discussion, kind of starting in 2021, this was another issue that came up in terms of what are we doing with our justice system that's not working, that we're seeing poorer outcomes, and that is also costing us money.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would assume that this 4-to-1 ratio is via the courts and DFS. Is that accurate?
Machine, that's a nationwide
It's-
average.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chadwick, I think it was difficult to get accurate numbers. I think what happens, but we do know that there's an administrative cost to going through all of these. And so what was hard to figure out is whether or not, for example, a case where you impose the child support, but it never gets paid and it's just a judgment against the family because they've never had the resources to pay it, whether that was a good return on the investment for the state to impose that and spend the money through child support, their work and their budget. So the idea would be to reduce the administrative burden. But I don't think we've been able to get a clear picture of what the financial impact would be in Wyoming. So we've used national figures.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's a repealer on page 9 and 10 that takes away the requirement for the parent of the child to seek employment if they're not fully employed. What's the purpose of that? And is that part of the requirement? It'd be nice to see that in, even if they don't have to cover these costs. It would be nice to see that requirement of the parent to seek full-time employment. I mean, that's something that really benefits the community, benefits the parent, overcome depression, a number of factors that are possible. What would you think about, tell me the reason for that, and what would you think if we kept that in the statute? Thank you.
Ms. Sheen, if you'd answer that question again. Thank you.
Chairman's Monitor, Representative Hornock. I think as we looked at the language, we wanted to suggest change in the statute. Our hope as a coalition would be that we send a different message to families that says we're here to help and try and help this family to put back together in a more healthy way, a life for the child and the family. And so language like that creates, it starts off on a negative foot. Certainly, does this language need to be removed in order for the bill to have the main effect? No, I think if committee members felt strongly about that, I certainly think the bigger, more important issue is to be able to keep the discretion change from shall to may. But I would just say that I think the Department of Family Services does an excellent job of engaging families positively in order to get them employed and able to take care of their children even without the court order.
Follow up, Representative Provenza, for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we haven't seen the courts ordering that. We don't have a single instance. So they are currently right now relying on the family case plans that the Department of Family Services comes up with those families. So it might be that there is a requirement in those case plans or at least conversation about it, right? So it's not as though we're taking it out. We're taking the burden off of the court, because a lot of what this is doing is trying to say, let's let the Department of Family Services, who's already kind of making a lot of these decisions and working with these families, let's let them do the good job that they are already doing and kind of take another burden off of the court when it maybe isn't necessarily making sense or required to do so to get the same effect.
Well, just, if you don't mind, the only difficult I do have with supporting the bill is that little section. Otherwise, I think we're on the right path with doing something like this. So I will bring an amendment just to keep that in. Thanks.
And it does say may, so I'm in some portions that may be acceptable. Other questions for Representative Provenza or Ms. Sheen? Seeing none, thank you both. I'm sure we'd like to hear from the department. And I see 2 of them in person and 2 of them online. Welcome, Ms. Schilling. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Schilling, and I'm the Social Services Senior Administrator for the Department of Family Services. So just a quick outline on kind of what I prepared for this morning. You've heard a lot about our current process, just in the fact that when a child is taken into agency custody, there is an action and a process that's followed to work on a child support order. I do also want to touch on the fiscal notes, highlight the big policy question that is before you. I have some information on national guidance, and then I think we have a proposal for next steps. So if that sounds good. Okay.
So far, go ahead.
So I'll skip to touching on the fiscal note. You've heard about the current process. If you'd like some context for that, in December, we had 793 active foster care child support orders. So just in terms of kind of the volume of what we're talking about. Of those 793 orders, 185 of them were 4E, and I'll explain that in just a minute. And then 608 of them were just basic foster care support orders. So we really track the child support payments received in those 2 buckets, either 4E or non-4E, and I'll explain that. So our total monthly collection for December was $23,242. And that fluctuates obviously month to month. Moving on to the fiscal note, I wanted to just bring that to your attention. You have a document from the LSO, the very top, it says the fiscal impact is indeterminable. Like, circle that, because that really is sort of the premise of where we are currently. There was not a "it depends" box on the fiscal note that we completed. So it was a worst case scenario, assuming that we go from current practice to no child support orders in any case ever. We know that we get $1.1 million a year in child support money into the agency. That money comes into us and goes directly into our direct service budget. So we do use it to turn around and pay for services provided to those children. So foster care subsidies, residential treatment, outpatient mental health, whatever that child needs, we use that money to help support and fund those services. So the big policy question on the table is, what is the fundamental responsibility of parents to financially contribute to the cost of care when children are in custody? And I don't believe we're going to answer that this morning. The follow-up part to that question is, does that change based on how the children comes into custody, or the child comes into custody? So if it's a neglect case, is that a different response than if it's a delinquency case, if it's a CHINS case? So there are a lot of different policy options that would be on the table, given the discretion that we would have in this bill. There's a lot of national conversation around this happening. We received federal guidance in the summer, last summer, July 2022, from Children and Family Services, ACF, at the national level. They updated the child welfare policy manual, encouraging states to thoroughly review, and only in cases where reunification is not disrupted should child support be pursued. And this guidance is specific to our 4E cases. So why specifically 4E? So when a child comes into custody, the family goes through a 4E eligibility determination. If that family is determined to be 4E eligible, we receive some additional federal funding support to pay for those services. But the financial criteria for being determined eligible is a family household income of 185% of the federal poverty level or lower. So I brought an example for a family of 4, that's $823 a month. If shelter is provided to them at no cost, $1,393 a month if they pay for their own shelter. So I think it can be assumed if a family is determined 4E eligible, they're living in some sort of financial distress. So then it comes to the question of the benefit of applying child support or requiring child support in those types of situations. The guidance from ACF stated that child support can negatively impact a family that is trying to develop and maintain familial and economic stability. And it went on to explain, and it's true in Wyoming too, in order to be reunified, parents are typically required to participate in a variety of agency-directed activities, visitation, parenting courses, mental health treatment. So reducing a parent's income could be argued that it impedes their ability to engage in reunification efforts, which might potentially expand the time the child spends in foster care. So ACF encourages child welfare agencies to make this important change in support of children and families. With the statute the way that it is right now, we haven't been able to entertain any change in policy based on that guidance. So
Can I just clarify that? So the feds basically, Todd, the
Mhm.
program is encouraging states to do something better in this area. But
Mhm.
right now the statutes don't allow you to, so you don't actually have any rules or regs. I guess my question ultimately is, if this bill passes, do you think you're going to have some type of interesting rule and regs or develop a matrix, or what would be the plan? Sorry, and that's coming. Didn't mean to jump ahead, but
That's okay, Chairman. So our proposed next steps, and I think that's why the fiscal note was so difficult, because that policy question hasn't been answered. We haven't worked with our stakeholders to come up with decisions on when it's appropriate to assign child support, when it's not appropriate. And those decisions will be what drives the fiscal impact. So I think our proposal and what we came up with internally for next steps is, if this bill were to pass, giving agencies sort of discretion and flexibility in the child support policies, we would propose working together with a stakeholder group to create policy options, provide a little bit more context to you all on what a 4E family looks like, how many of them we have, what a juvenile justice family looks like, and then just outline what options would be from a policy perspective, and then we can refine the fiscal impact numbers moving forward based on those recommendations and those policy options.
do you anticipate that to be a statutory need, or that would be internal to the agency? There would be no reason to come back and add statutes in this area.
Chairman, no, if there's interest by committee members to be kept apprised of that conversation, we can certainly come back and provide updates during the interim. And then based on the recommendations of that stakeholder group, you could consider a budget change next session, depending on the direction of those policies.
Representative Chadwick, and then we'll go down the list.
Ms. Schilling, thank you, Mr. Chairman. and this is very simple, very straightforward. Do you believe this will make your department more effective?
Go ahead. Effective.
Chairman Representative Chadwick, I think the flexibility it would provide the agency would allow us to make different decisions in support of the families that we work with.
Austin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just financially thinking about this, and I'm glad we're making parents kick in for their responsibility, but so we collected $23,000 basically in the month of December. Any idea what we spend trying to collect that $23,000?
Ms. Schilling, if you know.
Chairman Representative Clausen, we have Christy Gordy online who could speak to the child support collection.
We will bring her in right now. While she's coming in, any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you able to answer the question that I kind of raised before on this section about asking parents to seek employment? And it was mentioned that the case planning often includes that. How can you answer the question as to how often that actually occurs? Is that something that is often done to ask parents to seek employment?
Go ahead. Ms. Schilling.
Chairman Representative Penn, I don't have exact case numbers, but employment is a key factor in, reunification in many of our cases, so.
Representative Trujillo.
What's the ratio of caseworker to family?
If you know, Ms. Schilling.
Chairman Zwanitzer, Representative Trujillo, I would have to come back with our caseload information. I don't have that with me this morning, but I can certainly provide that by this afternoon.
And I do think last year in judiciary, we did have those numbers and they did a matrix. And I want to say it's between 6 to 8 to 1, depending on the county from a couple years back. But I know we have those numbers, and if you would send that to the committee. Ms. Gordy, did you hear the question earlier in regards to the numbers, or I can certainly have Representative Clouston, maybe just repeat the question, Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is referring to, we collected $23,000 in child support in the month of December. Just trying to think what kind of funds we're expending to collect that $23,000 a month.
Ms. Gordy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Christy Gordy. I'm the Senior Administrator of the Economic Security Division with the Department of Family Services, which includes child support. So, Representative Clubston, specifically to cost effectiveness, what we know in overall child support cases, we actually typically have a very good cost effective ratio. For typically every dollar we spend, we collect 8. What we know on these cases, and we need to do a deeper dive into our data, which we're working to do. Excuse me, but on these specific cases, we typically collect around 30% of in these cases. Across the board in all of our child support cases, we actually collect at a rate of 70%. So although we don't have the specific data on what we spend specifically, I'm fairly confident that once we get that data, our cost effectiveness will be significantly less on these very specific foster care cases, just because for all of the reasons you've heard already this morning, they do tend to be our most difficult cases to collect on.
Other questions in that realm? Seeing none. Other questions to the Department of Family Services while we have them? Seeing none right now. Thank you, Ms. Schilling.
Thank you.
Other people here to testify on the bill? On 245, I'm not seeing any. No one in the room is raising their hand, so we'll close public comment unless you had anything, Representative Provenza, to close off with before I close public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just ask the committee for your support on this. It's policy that sounds at face value like it's a good thing to have parents have a buy-in in this. But what we see from evidence is that that's not how it works. It keeps families apart longer. And our goal should always be to have those families reunite, given they are able to meet the standards that they need to provide loving and caring homes. And I believe that Wyoming families can do that. And I want to give them the best opportunity possible for them to do that. And I believe tying the hands of the court in DFS in these cases is not helping us accomplish those goals. So I hope you will support this legislation. Thank you.
All right, we'll close public comment. Thank you, Representative Provenza. Committee, is there a motion on House Bill 245?
Move the motion.
Moved by Chadwick, seconded by O'Hearn. Discussion committee or amendments, Representative Trujillo? Oh, you're just reaching for your mic. Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to bring an amendment and see if the committee is in favor of it. Being the part of what we do in our name is Labor Committee. I would like to leave in the struck out portion on page 9 and 10, not page 9, line 23 through page 10, line 4. So leave
4, line 13.
And also on page, if it's friendly, page 7 with the same language.
Okay.
So yeah, the language is in 3 different parts of our statute on the court, on
Yes.
the actual ordering of the payment and on the enforcement, all 3 of those sections.
Yeah, so page 4, it's
4.
lines 13 through 17, so retain the stricken language. On page 7, lines 6 through 10. And then, as he said, on pages 9 and 10. I second that motion.
Got that, Marilyn? Okay, so moved by Hornock, seconded by Ward. Committee, any discussion? In my mind, it says may, so I'm not concerned. Same thing, Reverend Hornock?
Yeah, just, I mean, there seems to me to be a valid process that can be used by the court. You know, one of the aspects of raising kids is supporting those kids, and oftentimes, you know, an adult might fall into depression or whatever that is. But one of the ways to overcome that and to reunite these families, I understand that it might be a great financial burden, especially if the parent doesn't have a job. So this bill does make sense, but leaving in that clause where there is room for the court to kind of push them toward seeking employment seems to kind of make sense to leave that in. Thank you.
Question, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That amendment's passed. Any other amendments on the bill, committee? If not, I might have a couple real quick. One, and although I can't actually make this motion as a chairman, if anybody wanted to ask for updates on the finances to this committee in the interim, say by October 1st, 2023, you could certainly move that at this time. It'd be a section 4.
So move.
Okay, so is there a second?
Second.
And so Maryland, basically on page 11, it'd just be a section 4 and say the Department of Family Services will update the Labor, Health and Social Service Committee in regards to the amending the Child Protection Act and child support obligations, whatever LSO wants to write, by October 1st, 2023. And then can I get the department to come back real quick? Ms. Schilling. And my question as you're walking up is on the section 3 being effective immediately. I just want to make sure, it's rare that we would take something effective immediately and move it back to July 1st. I just want to make sure, are you going to be ready to implement and start this program March 15th? And that'll be enough time to notify all of your, county offices and the courts, and any perspective on that? Do you think it can be effective immediately, or do you need some time to get people notified and make sure everybody understands the new process first?
Chairman Zwanitzer, I think that is up to the committee on how you want to word that. Realistically, we couldn't implement any policy changes until we have the money in the budget. So the two are connected to each other. So we will take the next 6 to 8 months to discuss policy, make recommendations, refine the budget impact, and bring that back to you. But until that money were to be approved, we couldn't change policy. So it will be status quo, business as usual, and that will continue until we work through the policy conversation.
Just make sure. So if we made this effective immediately and it started, it wouldn't, you're saying you would still continue to do status quo. Your agency wouldn't take the financial hit at the current time.
Chairman, that's correct.
I guess I don't need to move the date. Other amendments, thanks. Any other questions while on that regard while I have Ms. Schilling back? Representative Hornock.
Are you going to move that or leave it as is?
I believe I'm not going to move that
Okay.
now if it doesn't make a
Thank you.
difference. So, all right, other amendment from the bill committee. Seeing none and someone asking for the question being called, Marilyn, if you'd call the roll on House Bill 245. Oh. Did we voted on the report? Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody loves bureaucracy.
Ready?
Go ahead.
Representative Chadwick.
Aye.
Representative Klauston.
Aye.
Representative Hornock.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
Aye.
Representative Yin voted aye, absentee vote. Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye.
The bill passes,
All
9
right.
ayes.
Representative Provenza, you'll have it on the floor on Monday, maybe? Okay. Thank you. Well, that committee, the next bill for our consideration is brought by Representative Henderson. It's House Bill number. Grab my next one. 221, Domestic Violence Prosecution Amendments. Welcome, Representative Henderson. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Appreciate your time. I bring House Bill 221, and I'll just start with a little background real quick. I have a constituent who rang my doorbell back in October. His daughter had a former boyfriend. They had a minor child together. His daughter had been beaten. The allegation is that an individual came over 2 hours from a city in Wyoming, broke and entered the apartment, and she was beaten twice on a Sunday in October. A protection order was in effect. And this is happening multiple times in between, for example, between May and October of last year. The allegation is there were 9 beatings. So 9 beatings last year, 2 in October, protection order in place. So I started contacting people about what we could do about it. I looked into the statutes. And the statutes, as you see in the bill, I'll just walk through them very quickly. Fundamentally, this provides a new section under 7-1-106, prosecution of crimes. And I'm very careful not to interfere with the prosecution discretion. But I did borrow a statute from South Dakota that I'm told is best practice for reporting. But I'll just walk through the related statutes. We have some very good laws related to this. Very good. You know, we have the one over on, as you see in the bill, 62506, stalking penalty. One over here on 62510, domestic assault. And the one that really pertains in this case is the one right next door to it on 62511, domestic battery. And then 64404, violation of the domestic violence under order of protection penalty. So, and the minor child's there. I mean, the law is no good if it's not enforced. And so I'm asking you for an opportunity to have this heard on the floor so everyone's representative can weigh in. Our county had a particular situation I'm sure you know about. I provided you with information on the work of a good intern over the last few weeks on what happened in our county over the last 3 years. Last year, there were 468 domestic battery cases. I've spoken with our new DA. She's been in office for 3 weeks. And she's a good one. When I went to school, she was my teacher on a couple of legal courses. One of them is kind of a related area. But anyway, the point is, in this case, the police were called out, and police do a really good job. This is not about law enforcement or the quality of law enforcement. This may be an outlier, but fundamentally, if somebody breaks into your house and beats the heck out of you in front of your child, right, and you have a concussion and 90 pictures of the injuries, I think you should have an opportunity to know what the status of the case is, right? And nothing's been heard since October, according to the alleged victim I spoke with last week. And I have turned all this over. The good news, my friends, is that our DA, on her own initiative, has arranged for an investigator to make contact. And I'm glad to report that contact was made yesterday in a phone conversation about 20 minutes. So I'm hopeful that that'll follow through. So let's look at the data. As policymakers, I think that's important. If you look at the 3 years that you have data on there in the handout, it's going down. The DA informed me that there were the cases that they had domestic battery last year, only 2 were declined, 65 were dismissed. And 80 to 90% of that, she said, were dismissed at the request of the victim. We have to respect people. This is about respect. People have these bad situations, and we need to make sure, I believe, that our law is enforced. And if there's a shortfall in the system, I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and I'm here to tell you that I'm going to work very hard for the agencies that I'm assigned, District 1 attorney, District 7 attorney, and the county attorneys, to make sure that they're fully funded so that everywhere in Wyoming, nobody has to endure this kind of stuff. So that's where I want to leave it. I mean, the bill is pretty straightforward. I'm focusing on bodily harm. And I did consult with our good attorneys in the legislature, and nobody, including attorneys, wants to be told what to do. And if you read the language, I've had several versions of this. This is version 4. And they helped with the wording. They didn't want it. They didn't want the bill. Maybe because, for whatever reason, maybe our county is an outlier because of, as you know, there was an issue here with the former person in office. But 268 domestic violence batteries, you can see on their pictures, was provided by the Highway Patrol contact for Cheyenne. And it's like a heat map, and it shows the concentrations where these are happening. Okay. This is available all over our state. You can get this anywhere in Wyoming. But where it's darker, that means more is happening. And of that, almost 24% are repeats. Repeats. We've got to do something about this. I ask for your support. Now stand by for questions.
Thanks, Representative Henderson. I know you said the bill kind of speaks for itself, but I just want to make sure we're aware of what it does. And so any of these state level crimes or respective ordinances, if the district attorney decides not to file charges, they need to provide a written explanation. I guess my thought was how this sounds perhaps very detailed. I guess I'm wondering on the paperwork aspect, because here in our county, because we represent the same county, we do have a lot of these incidents. I'm just wondering if your talk with our district attorney or with law enforcement, they raised any concerns on if this is going to, take up a lot more time and keep people from, not that this isn't as important, but I'm just wondering if there's a fiscal impact or a staff impact, perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess it's hard. It's a hard area. Hard area. I mean, I've had other constituents contact me, and one said his father beat him because he didn't answer a question right. Every time he came home, he was asked a question, he didn't answer right, so he got beaten. I'm not prescribing what the district attorney or any attorney wants to do with regard to reporting, but a simple report to say, hey, here's the status of this case. We've decided not to prosecute, or we've decided to pursue it and investigate more. And so, I mean, and I believe in due process of everybody involved. But the answer to the question, Mr. Chairman, it's a good question, but it's going to vary, I think, across the state. And I think we have to leave that open to the discretion of the attorneys. But simply stated, that paragraph that I took in there for the report, I borrowed that from South Dakota. That's enacted law, and I'm told that's best practice. A mandatory report. I think that's common courtesy. This, hey, you know, what's up? And I don't have any way of knowing if there was a report filed in this case. It's a private matter from my perspective. I'm a legislator, right? But on the behalf of the person and family involved and others around our state, particularly in our county, I think a simple report, hey, we're moving forward. You know, in this case, a simple phone call got connection. And I'm happy to say that's happening. That's a good thing.
For questions, Representative Klauston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Henderson, thank you for bringing this forward. It's something we all need to talk about. I just do have a question. Like, to me, if the police are called to an incident, there has to be a report filed already, right? How does this make what we're currently doing even better?
Representative Henderson.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think it closes the loop. And it involves all three key parties involved, the prosecutor, the law enforcement, and importantly, the victim and their family. Right? We all have families. And these are bad lives to live if you're involved in these things. And so I think that knowing, I think now I can't find anywhere in our statute where we have that. I don't find that requirement. If you find it, please tell me.
Okay, follow up, other questions. Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of echo the chairman's question a little bit. So, and I don't know that I heard an answer. So, first of all, you know, I know that our district attorneys are the paperwork of cases and caseloads that they have is incredibly high. They're doing a tough job with the resources, the limited resources. I agree that we've given them. It seems to me that this will negatively impact them to where if they have to file on every domestic abuse case or cases that meet this requirement, write a note. You mentioned a phone call. That phone call isn't in the statute. It's a written report as I read your bill. It seems to me like that will take a tremendous amount of time for our district attorneys who are already up to their eyeballs in cases. But you know, I appreciate the intent. But have you discussed that with the district attorney and are they good with it? Thanks.
Representative Henderson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I say, I made contact with our new district attorney 3 weeks in office, and I've arranged to meet with her after the session. Give her a chance to take a look at what she has. And I think all of our attorneys are open to that. And I'm going to go around to the agencies that I spoke of and make contact and identify an answer to your question specifically. But if you take the cases that are declined, right? I don't think that's too much to just have a phone call, and this could be amended to a phone call, but there's an investigator in every one of these cases. There's a report, right? It's a simple matter of saying, hey, just shoot a copy over to the victim if that's okay. I don't know the legal process well enough to say what you want to do in terms of disclosure of key pieces of evidence. But you know what? In Wyoming, thank God, in the doctrine of laches, there is no statute of limitation on crime. And evidence is evidence. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we allow these perpetrators to continue on without being held accountable. Thank you for the question.
Discussion, follow up.
Yeah, follow up. So also, I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit. This specifically talks about district attorneys. So there's 2 places, as you're aware, that we have the district attorneys here in the city and then center of the state. So what happens in the rest of the state where we don't have that district attorney person?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Mr. Chairman, the simple answer is I'm not sure completely, but it's my understanding that 21 counties have attorneys. And they are the ones that do the district attorney's role that hard job in those counties, that most of them are rural, limited assets. And so I think we have to be sensitive to their situation too. But we just recently, over the last few years, put a lot of money into e-file. Perhaps there's a way to provide a report through that where they just go on electronic and hit a few buttons in whatever case is applicable. And that happens, right? It's 2023. So let's use technology.
In our statutes, district attorney and county attorney in the 21 counties that don't have a district attorney are, I wouldn't say completely interchangeable, but interchangeable. Other questions, Representative Henderson? Not seeing any, Bill. Thank you. Other people here to testify on House Bill 221. Welcome, Tara. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Zwanitzer and committee members. Good morning. I haven't met a lot of you yet, so I'm looking forward to more conversations. My name's Tara Muir. I am the Public Policy Director with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. We work on behalf of survivors in these crimes, as well as our network of crisis program centers across the state. There's one in every county. A nonprofit, very community-based advocates who work and come alongside survivors, especially when they're facing the criminal justice system, but also civil justice, custody battles, those kinds of things, all the pieces that a victim needs to heal and move forward. We work on that. Very much talk about best practices. And I want to thank Representative Henderson a lot for all his work on this issue. He's one that wants to take initiative, so we support him 100%. We do support this bill because we want victims to get the justice they deserve and in the form they want. There is a whole set of statutes about victims' rights. Article 2. Great statute, but there is no enforcement mechanism in that entire list of victims' rights at all. The Attorney General's Division of Victim Services does most of the funding out to these community-based programs that we work with. We usually say they're the heavy hand of the money, and we're the nice ones who just help them do the work the best they can. But even the Division of Victim Services has said there are no teeth in our victims' rights statutes. And I talk about that because that's another way to get at the same issue. Criminal justice is only one way to end domestic violence. There's a whole host of other services we can talk about. But just for a little background, it's kind of been since the 1980s that the domestic violence movement has grown, really focused on what do survivors need most. And that criminal justice system is only one way. It's the tool, though, to prevent homicide. And that's what happens way too often in some of these cases if we don't intervene early enough in these bad battery cases that Representative Henderson is talking about. We know our communities don't have enough resources to really do what's needed in every single case. There's best practices of doing risk assessments with survivors. There's best practices in doing lethality assessments. Police officers doing those and prosecutors being at the same table, especially with some of the most egregious cases, which it certainly sounds like this one was. And we don't want to pick on the players and those responders because they're all struggling to do the best jobs they can as well. But too often things fall through the cracks and people die. There's an aggressive abuser who is not stopped. And it is our movement's choice to go to law enforcement and ask them to please help intervene. And so we've passed a lot of these great laws in Wyoming. It's the enforcement, it's the resources to have the training and the knowledge of what will help survivors best. That's mostly needed. So trying to keep it short because I know you have other bills to get to. We'd really ask that this bill, there's other bills that have been floating through this session some about custody battles and what do you do with domestic violence survivors and victims who lose custody. And there's a lot of parental rights movement happening. How best do we do them in those hard custody cases? The relationship of guns and domestic violence. It's a tough topic, but we need to talk about that too. So we'd like to ask for an interim study. Move this bill forward so you could have the conversation on the floor. I think it's complex, but I think we'll all learn a lot. And then I'd love for this committee, especially the Labor and Social Services Committee, to take it up as an interim topic because there's so many other interventions and services that not just the victim needs, but the person who's choosing to use violence needs as well. And how best can we devise a new and different system, not necessarily new, but bring some of those best practices to Wyoming and not just put it all on law enforcement to fix it or our advocates fix it. Lots of other things can happen because I think we all should have the same two goals. Let's help that victim be safe so they and their children can heal. And how do we hold the offenders responsible and accountable? Sometimes that's not the criminal justice system, and we love that conversation. Happy to take questions. Thank you for hearing us this morning.
Any questions from the committee from Ms. Muir? Representative Trujillo.
Thank you, Chair. On these 343 repeat calls, or what they say 23.9%, what are we doing for the victim to lower that 23.9%?
Ms. Muir?
Thank you, Chairman Yin. Now I have a new chairman. Hi. Thank you. Great question. What we've learned in trying to help victims address the violence in their lives is come along beside them and find out just how dangerous this is and help them maybe get some education about just how dangerous this is. Often when they first make that law enforcement call, or maybe one of their children or neighbors is calling 911, a lot more has happened before that. And what we know about domestic violence is it is a repeat offense. So when law enforcement get that second and third call, that's when all the bells and whistles should be going off. What are we going to do for this family? We think making sure there's a community-based advocate right beside the victim is one of the most central things we can do. And not surprising, our budgets have been cut in half and in half and in half over the past couple of years. Because that survivor needs to be able to tell someone what's actually going on in that house. What you'll also hear when you go to law enforcement trainings is swift consequences for the person using the violence needs to happen. So when they first become aware and there's pictures of bruises and injuries, there needs to be, you're going to go to jail tonight. And maybe, maybe it's a Wednesday night and then you'll talk to the judge first thing in the morning. That already tells that offender, wow, they're taking this serious. I don't want to be in jail. And that's our best opportunity to intervene quickly with, okay, listen, Mr. or Ms. offender, you need to get some re-education. We can't abide you using violence in your family. I'm afraid with all our limited resources, they don't get that message. They just don't get that message. I think what we hear from survivors is, survivor, you go find another place to stay tonight. Take your children if you need to, but you go pack a bag and get out and be safe for tonight because we don't really want to arrest him, especially depending on who he is.
Any follow-up? Any other questions for Ms. Muir? Thank you, Ms. Muir.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment on House Bill 221? Representative Henderson, anything that you'd like to add before we close public comment? So given that, we'll close public comment on House Bill 221. Members, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Chadwick. Second by Representative Clausen. Any amendments? Page 1 of the bill. Representative Penn.
I did like the idea of considering an amendment to, instead of simply requiring a written explanation, to offer the opportunity for a phone call. And maybe have so on page 2, line 8, it says provides a written explanation, and I might say comma, or phone call which connects with the victim.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Ward. Any discussion on the amendment or phone call which connects with the victim? Do you have that, Marilyn?
Yes, sir.
Seeing no discussion, question on the amendment being called. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Amendment carries. Any other amendments on page 2 of the bill? And then page 3 of the bill? Any other discussion on the bill? Representative Hornock.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I fully support information and going toward victims. I mean, for the last several years, I've been part of a victim services fundraising effort and stuff here in this county. My only worry with this bill is first that we didn't hear from the district attorneys to see how this affects their load. And I'm a little bit worried about that portion. And I'm a little bit worried about, there might be instances where because of the nature of an ongoing investigation, they might not be able to reach out to that victim and specifically give them information about the case, because a lot of times this domestic abuse thing, I mean, it could be somebody who's living in the house or very closely connected. So I just don't know that was really taken into consideration. It could be something that they are actively investigating, but you don't want to reach out to that victim to say, hey, we're about to arrest your husband or something like that, of that nature, because you want that disconnect as they're continuing their investigation. I support the victims, and it's a tough scenario when there's a black hole with information, but I'm a little bit hesitant on some of those portions of it. And I wish we could, maybe work through those in the interim or something and get those things cleared up in relation to this. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Henderson, if you'd like to add, please.
just to help Mr. Chairman, thank you, just to help the question. You all have seen perhaps the administrative impact memo. It was provided by the District 1 Attorney Financial Officer, not the District 7. And so that's a key piece that I want to find out about going forward with the meeting with the local district attorney. The other part of it, I think just a simple, straightforward message is continuing to protect the time and save time and the evidence. I want to do something to disrupt the case. So thank you.
Representative Penn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I realized that the amendment that we just made, actually, I think we might have put it on the wrong line. So I don't know if I need to bring another amendment or what, but where I actually intended that to go was on page 3, line 1, after the detailed report. So that's where it's actually talking about report to the victim. The other one was where we added it was discussing the, and actually they could probably be in both locations. But where we added it is actually where it says if they decline to press or pursue charges. And in that situation, I might actually think that that's reasonable to provide a written explanation. But the phone call, in effort to decrease the burden on the attorneys, is more reaching out to the victim itself on the status. And so I'm not sure what the process is to just maybe move that down to page 3 rather than page 2.
So Representative Penn, so you can move to strike the language from the previous amendment and then just move it to where you would like on page 3, if you want to make that motion.
Second reading or something.
would it be, okay, would it be more appropriate to do it now or in second reading, or does it make a difference?
That is up to you, Representative Penn. We
Yeah.
happy to handle it now because we're working the
Yeah,
bill.
let's just go ahead and do it now.
So your,
um,
your motion is to strike the new language that you added in the previous amendment and move it to page 3 on line 2 after taken.
To page 3, line 1 after report. So shall
Okay.
prepare a detailed report, comma, or phone call that connects to the victim.
Okay, Marilyn, do you have that
Yes.
same language? Everyone understands, committee? Okay, so all those, any other discussion on the amendment first? Representative Claston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify here, I mean, they're gonna read. You're saying or a phone call? I mean, they're gonna prepare a written report. Are you asking just to make sure that they call? So it should say, and a phone call to the victim? Is that what you're after? You want to make sure they're contacted by phone? Or you're okay with a written report or a phone call?
Well, I think I'm
Representative Penn.
okay. Oh, thank you, Chairman. I think I'm okay with or. We were, he mentioned, Representative Henderson had mentioned that, just a simple phone call to the victim to give an update on what the status of the case is. And so in effort to decrease burden, I was thinking that a phone call might be easier to just say, hey, this is what's going on.
Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Like what Representative Clausen was saying on line 2, line 21, in addition to the reports required under subsection A and B of this section, a primary law enforcement officer investigating incident of domestic violence shall prepare a detailed report and a phone call. So he's already doing the report. If we say or, that delineates line 21 through line 1 of page 3. So it should say and.
Okay, and thank you. And I was, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And I, thank you. So I was actually thinking about not the law enforcement side, but really the attorney side. So I guess I'm actually looking really in my or phone call would be actually down in line 5 on the status of the case. After
So Representative Penn, you'd like it to read, the district attorney shall notify the victim within 5 days of the status of the case. Or phone call. So I guess that's a little confusing.
Yeah, I guess that one actually doesn't say detail, report. So I withdraw the amendment.
Okay, Representative Penn, well, first, is the second okay with withdrawing it? Okay. Do you want to still strike the language that we added on line 8 on page 2, where we had that language in the first amendment, or would you like to get rid of it as well?
Let's leave that alone and we'll do it some amendment too.
Okay, well, let it be. Thank you.
Okay. Any other amendments on the bill, members? Any other discussion on the bill?
Question.
Nope, Representative Claston.
Just real quick. So I'm in favor of this. I've contacted I've heard back from some of my local law enforcement people. They say they do most of this already and they're okay with it. I guess my only comment would be if I hear from some of the other law enforcement people in my area would say, oh, we don't like this, then I would bring that to you, but I'm okay moving this forward.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Representative
Just real
Henderson, one
quick.
last time. This is the last
Just real
time.
quick, I did share this with the Association of Chiefs and Sheriffs. And it's been turned over to their board and I welcome their feedback too. So that's out there. Thank you.
Question.
Any other comments from the committee? Question being called. Marilyn, will you please take the roll?
Representative Chadwick.
Aye.
Representative Clouston.
Aye.
Representative Hornock.
No.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
Aye.
Chairman Zwaniter cast an absentee vote and Chairman Yin.
No.
Thank you. The bill passes with 7 ayes and 2 noes.
Representative Henderson, are you comfortable with presenting it on the floor if it comes to the floor? Thank you. Okay, so we have Marilyn, is our schedule to have House Bill 233 next?
Let's see.
Make sure myself.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Ward.
so the bringer of the bill is not present in the room. And if we gave him a little more time, he might be. So I propose hearing my bill 143 first. If the committee is agreeable.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I'm the chairman right now. Marilyn, would you be able to see if someone could locate Representative Allemand?
Okay, yeah, 233 is technically scheduled next.
And let me just
Georgia?
make sure what we noticed. Representative Penn, please.
Just weighing in on this, I did hear a conversation between Representative Allemand, who's in another committee meeting, and he had discussed with Representative Ward that if he wasn't here when his bill was up, that he would be agreeable to let her go first.
Okay, well then with that, Representative Ward, please present your bill, House Bill 143. Representative Ward, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To quote another chairman, this is just a simple little bill. One paragraph. The bill simply states United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization shall have no jurisdiction in Wyoming, and any requirements, mandates, recommendations, instructions, or guidance provided by either organization shall not be used in this state to justify any mask, vaccine, or medical testing requirements, and shall have no force or effect in Wyoming. A new report by the Cochrane Institute analyzing 78 global studies involving 1 million people, 1 million people, says that surgical masks are statistically insignificant, and I quote, statistically insignificant in lowering the chance of catching COVID. So before certain agencies state that they will lose their funding, I would like to remind everyone that even the current presidential administration has ended the scamdemic emergency, and it ends in May. So I ask for your favorable consideration. I further request that the people of Wyoming be allowed to speak first before any agency. And I'll stand for questions.
Members of the committee, any questions for Representative Ward? Representative Chadwick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Ward, so do we know, have you spoken to the State Health Department to find out whether this would have any financial ramifications for the state? Are there funds that could be withheld from the state if we take this action?
I have not spoken.
Representative Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not spoken to the Department of Health, but given their previous testimony, I believe that they believe that to be true. Previous testimony on House Bill 66.
Representative Chadwick, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the State Health Department believes that we would lose funding.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that they believe they would. I
Thank
do
you.
not think that is true based on the fact that the presidential administration, which is now in effect, has declared an end to the scamdemic emergency.
Representative Chadwick, any other follow-up? No. Any other? Representative Claston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, in theory, I agree with you, but I'm just going to read you a little bit here from the CDC. The CDC, as the nation's public health protection agency, CDC has certain authorities to implement regulations relating to protecting America from health and safety threats, both foreign and within the United States, and increasing public health safety. They implement public health laws passed by Congress through federal regulations. So, you know, I guess any of our funds, programs from banks to to nursing homes that have to follow these guidelines. I feel like this would put a lot of our industries and funds at risks. I mean, our National Guard, our Department of Transportation, these are all things that I'm just not willing to risk our relationship and funds with those agencies for this rule. So I guess the question would be, how would you implement restoring these funds from the state level if we lost these federal funds?
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not believe that losing state funds is a real threat, frankly. Again, the current administration has declared an end to the emergency, so I don't believe that our funds are at risk.
Representative Claston, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I understand the status of the COVID situation right now. What I worry about is future, like this would limit us from future viruses or other things that could come to our country. And I'm not willing to put those handcuffs on our country. So how do you see this affecting future viruses or public health problems that could arise?
Representative Ward, if you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would maintain that the Constitution does not grant the federal government the right to jurisdict over public health. Constitution does not give them that authority. The fact that they are exercising that authority is unconstitutional.
Any follow-up? So Representative Ward, I have a question. So I think lines on page 2, which is, I mean, the whole bill. I don't think that they do have jurisdiction right now, and I don't think anything has granted the WHO or the CDC any jurisdiction. However, I mean, I guess the concern is a kind of a First Amendment concern. Do you think that restricting any organization to use their recommendations is a First Amendment concern, that they can't say that they agree to the recommendations from the CDC or WHO? Because that's what it sounds like to me, that we're tying the backs of these organizations. Is that a First Amendment concern? Representative Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't view that as restricting speech. They could mention the CDC. They just can't use them to justify implementing mandates.
Representative Penn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Representative Ward, so I'm feeling like this basically is saying that, or this bill wouldn't be preventing us from still choosing to follow whatever recommendations they might make. It's more of a statement that says that we aren't going to allow them to dictate our practices. Would you agree?
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I agree with the statement of Representative Penn.
So maybe to follow up on Representative Penn's question, Representative Ward. So, I think a statement is fine, but we do have shall not be used in the state to justify. Is that more than a statement where we actually prevent a hospital from saying you can't wear masks in the surgical operating room because the CDC has recommended that helps prevent disease transmission? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be amenable to amendments specifying that this is related to COVID-19 and similar emergencies and not applicable to the surgeon room, the emergency room, or any operating room. That is not the intention of this bill.
Any other questions? Representative Hornak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I don't know that that's all that necessary. So, correct me if I'm wrong. So we've got these national organizations and worldwide organizations. And this bill is just saying that Wyoming needs to figure it out. They can recommend whatever they want on the national level, on the world level, but Wyoming needs to make sure that we kind of figure it out. And I mean, before the pandemic that we had a couple of years ago, Wyoming had a specific to Wyoming pandemic response plan that I think we threw out the window. and just went with these national organizations. So we can use their recommendation, but we have to figure it out on our own, and we can't just justify what we're doing with what they say. We have to kind of explain on our own that yes, Wyoming, whatever we do matches this or matches that, and here's the reason why. Is that what you're saying with this?
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The intent of this bill is that Wyoming is sovereign over its own state affairs, since the Constitution does not grant power to the federal government over public health. Thank you.
Any follow-up? Any other questions for Representative Ward? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Ward. You're more than welcome to join us back up here. I will open up public comment for House Bill 143. Please come up. Oh, please. Please introduce yourself to the committee and then the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sean Murphy. I'm here representing myself as I have some unique knowledge of this entire situation. What I handed everyone on the committee today is the news from a few days ago. This is from CNBC. People refer to them as the corporate media. We hear different names to call mass media different names. So they're here reporting sales of Pfizer's COVID vaccine, $100 billion. Just think about that. $100 billion from the COVID vaccine and this Paxlovid. I'm a guy who follows the money. And that's what we're really talking about here. Understand there was a concern that the state may not have certain money from the CDC. We don't receive money from the CDC. What's very interesting about this article is it's framed in a way that, oh, Pfizer's earnings are going down. Oh, so sad. Like we're not going to be able to keep up our sales and keep our investors happy. I mean, that's what's happening. And then on the last page, there's the link to the ad where the CDC is urging people with weak immune systems to take extra precautions with the COVID, the next subvariant. And this is the classic pharmaceutical model. There's going to be subvariants. This is going to become like the flu, and there's going to be never-ending vaccines. And I think it's important to put on record here, there's going to be another mega virus. This is a business model for these companies. And until we wake up as a nation and a state and a legislature that this is the game that is being played, I mean, this isn't safe and effective. I have a child. He has a terminal brain disease. His name's Atlas. The condition is called Alexander disease. It's a genetic condition, a spontaneous mutation. I looked at when this was all happening with the FDA, and they were making the case that the vaccine should be approved for children 6 months to 5 years old. And it was staggering the corruption that I saw on that FDA vaccine committee, that the evidence was presented. The top vaccine expert in the world stood back and said, look, I don't think the risk here, justifies this. I don't think we should be moving. And then one by one, they all voted that it should be approved. And the evidence for its efficacy for children that young was weak. And there was a public outcry from parents that, hey, there's risks here. There's people being injured by this vaccine. And we don't hear about that in the media because when you have $100 billion, that's called a war chest. And you can pay for a lot of sponsorship and advertising. And you don't see Pfizer on a big banner here on the top because it's a lot more subtle than that. That's how sophisticated the pharmaceutical industry is. And when you have $100 billion from one drug, you can become very sophisticated. So I'm sharing all of this with you because that's the big game that's going on here. And I think this bill is getting at the right thing. This is about states' rights and that we shouldn't have these captured government agencies, federal government agencies, the CDC, and then there was the NIAID with Dr. Fauci, AKA the vaccine agency. And then the new one that we haven't heard much about, but I know about, is going to be called ARPA-H. It's similar to DARPA, which was the technology incubator in our federal government, but now there's going to be a health incubator. It's been funded for $1 billion. And what are they researching? Vaccine development and biotracking. This is what's going on at the national level. So this bill gets at the heart that we should, as a state, be able to say that we don't want these captured government agencies, and then the CDC is, or the World Health Organization, because that's really just the UN. That's world government, right? That's the World Health Organization. We don't think that these institutions should be telling us what's going on in Wyoming. And I know there's a concern that it could be a financial issue, that we might not receive funding, but I think that's a scare tactic. I don't think that's reality. I don't see any mechanism in here that would prevent funding or funds coming to Wyoming based upon this bill. So I think a way to get around that or to protect against that would be to have a Wyoming emergency plan, or to bring back the plan that I heard Representative Hornock talk about, and that it should be done at our level of government. It should be done in Wyoming, and we shouldn't be subject to the control and the influence of the CDC, the FDA, and the World Health Organization, because I've lived that. I've lived that when I, as a father, was like, I don't think my son should have these vaccines. It didn't matter. There was a policy and a mandate that Children's Hospital had that said, no, we think he should have it. And my son's mom said, I want to follow that policy and mandate. And I, as the dad, said, I don't think we should. So he was vaccinated against my wishes. I said, we should wait and see how this plays out. He's not at risk for getting COVID-19 and dying. Let's wait. Let's be safe. Let's be conservative here. And what happened? 2 months after he had vaccine boost and all the CDC recommended 4-year-old vaccines, he started having seizures. So I'm a parent holding my child now, having seizures 2 weeks after his CDC scheduled vaccines. And what am I supposed to do about that? Just sit around, and I live 2 blocks away, and just take this? No, I'm going to speak out against it as a parent, because I see the game that's afoot. And I know we're smart in Wyoming. And I know we think about states' rights. And that's what this really gets down to. And this is the big issue in our country and our world right now. And when you read something that says $100 billion, know that there are people that don't have our best interests at heart. They have their interests at heart. And this is only going to expand, and it's going to happen. There's going to be, I'm saying it here on record, there's going to be another pandemic. It's going to happen. There's too much money in this for them not to come up with something that drives pharmaceutical drug sales. So I think we should get ahead of that. And it might be having a pandemic response plan, or it might be just being smart and having a bill like this move forward that protects states' rights. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Murphy? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if you are aware of the recent revelations by an organization called Project, and a name that means truth.
Project Veritas, I'm familiar with all that.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Where the Pfizer, an employee at Pfizer admitted that a pharmaceutical company
Representative Ward, it's fine to use proper names in committees. It's only on the floor where we have that rule.
was deliberately making variants of the virus so that they could make more money with vaccines. Are you
Yeah,
aware
So,
of that
Mr. Murphy,
video?
so, Mr. Murphy, so just before, ensure that you go through the chairman and that I recognize you before you speak, but please, Mr. Murphy.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still not yet too fluent at this process,
that's
but
okay.
I journey to try to get it right. So thank you. Yes, that I've seen the video of the Pfizer executive and the Project Veritas video where he uses a term, it's genetic something that, they're basically asking, well, is this gain of function? And he goes, no, we don't call it gain of function. We call it like genetic acceleration or genetic evolution. I don't have the term handy, but the video is very compelling. It basically explains the game that is afoot, that they're going to create, new subvariants, and then there'll be more vaccines to address those. And it's admitted. And the moment it hit YouTube, YouTube pulls it down. But when you're Pfizer, you can buy YouTube. You can buy censorship. That's easy. You have $100 billion on one drug. That's easy. So yes, I'm aware of that, Representative Ward.
Any other questions for Mr. Murphy? Questions? Nope. Otherwise, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public comment on House Bill 143? Please come up. Please introduce yourself to the committee and then the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Russell, Cheyenne, Wyoming. I've been a mother for going on 50 years. My training is in biology, including microbiology. I have worked in biology labs. I have a friend who was an international inspector for the FDA and told me stories that raised the hair off the back of my neck about the laxity of their investigations overseas and their unwillingness to reveal, for financial reasons, what is actually going on. So I'm speaking from a background of both personal experience and professional and career and training experience. You are our last stop in this issue. No one should be mandating a vaccine for anyone. My daughter, at the age of 2, was given a DPT. We went home and her big sister came in to tell me, Mom, Amy's got spots on her legs. And I said, what do you mean she has spots on her legs? I went in and looked, and starting at her ankle, she had hemorrhaging. And as I watched over the next hour, those spots grew in number and size and started climbing toward her knee. I called her doctor and he said, if they reach her knee, you got to bring her in right away. I lived in a town out in the middle of nowhere. We were an hour and a half from the nearest children's hospital. Fortunately, by noon, it had stopped. It only dawned on me many years later why he was concerned. He was concerned because of clotting. These spots were this big on her leg. This is from a vaccine that has been proven. All my other children were vaccinated, but from that point on, she got no more of them. And when possible, I discouraged her from getting them for her children because of the possible genetic connection. I also had genetics. We cannot mandate anything because everyone is different. Everyone's genetics are different. Everyone's reactions are different. To give recommendations is one thing. To force people at the point of losing a child or losing a job is wrong. I'm going to beg you once again to vote this down. Vote this bill up. Do not enforce mandates. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Russell? Nope. Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Russell. Any other public comment on House Bill 143? Okay. Is there any comment online, Lily? Please bring them in. So I just feel free to bring them in one at a time and then we'll recognize them as they come in. Ms. Pavey, I believe you are online. Feel free to unmute and turn on your video and then introduce yourself and then the floor is yours.
Hi. I get so nervous testifying. Thank you for letting me testify this morning. My name is Laura Pavey. I'm a mother in Sweetwater County. I am in support of this bill. The WHO and the CDC are not government agencies. And as a mother whose daughter was permanently damaged from the mask mandates, I urge you to vote aye on this bill and help prevent their overreach. I want to be quick, so I know that you guys have a lot of time, so I'll close for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pavey, for joining us. Any questions for Ms. Pavey? Okay. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
So there seems to be a little bit of an echo. Is someone,
I'm not on.
Ms. Pavey, do you have YouTube open or do you either? Ms. Pearson, do you?
Can you hear me?
Ms. Pearson, I'm going to mute you for a second just so we can take any questions from Ms. Pavey. So Representative Ward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, what happened to your daughter?
My daughter was forced, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My daughter wore a mask to school every day. Her teacher would say that she was lethargic. She would come back to school the next day and she couldn't remember what she had learned the next day. We ended up taking her down to a hospital. We ended up seeing numerous doctors, and it ended up coming out that she had a TBI, traumatic brain injury, from hypoxic episodes. That was probably from the masks, most definitely. She got mask mouth, where her teeth, all three of my children got mask mouth, where their mouths smelt atrocious. They started getting multiple cavities build up. And it was something that we had to combat at home a lot. My daughter will forever have short-term memory loss and phonological dyslexia from the masks.
Any follow-up? Nope. Thank you, Ms. Pavey, for joining us.
Thank you.
Ms. Pearson, I will unmute you. And you are welcome to introduce yourself, and then you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm asking for a vote of aye on this bill. We as a state need the tool to be sovereign against the federal government and the WHO. If there is one thing we have learned from COVID, it is to do our own research and advocate for ourselves. The WHO and the CDC are not elected agencies. Why are they allowed to control the narrative in our healthcare? There should be no mandates. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Pearson from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Pearson, for joining us. I think we have Devin Brubaker. Is that the last one online, Lily? Request with their hand up. Great. So Devin, please introduce yourself to the committee, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Devin Brubaker, Airport Director for the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport, also representing the Wyoming Airports Coalition. In short, we stand against this bill, opposed to this bill. We are airport experts. We are not healthcare experts. When recommendations are made by professionals that are experts in the medical fields, we need to be able to rely on them to make decisions, to be able to protect the travelers at our airports. Secondly, the federal government, including the FAA and Federal Aviation Administration and Transportation Security Administration, rely on the recommendations and guidance of the CDC to establish their regulatory framework for airports. If we do not follow those guidelines, which this bill would prohibit, if we do not follow those guidelines or regulatory oversights from FAA or TSA, we find ourselves in violation of our federal grant assurances, as well as potential security guidance from TSA. So the Wyoming Airports Coalition stands opposed to this bill, much like we did House Bill 66. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Brubaker, so to make it clear, it's not that you have to follow a mandate that comes from the CDC. It's a mandate that comes from either the FAA or TSA that tells you to implement the recommendations from the CDC. Is that correct, Mr. Brubaker?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Brubaker? Representative Hornock, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So could you elaborate a little bit? This bill talks about that the state makes their own mandates. It's not that we don't have to abide by them. It's that we get the option of saying yes or no to any of these. Can you be specific as to how this will, why you couldn't abide on your own by any of these regulations? Thank you.
Mr. Brubaker.
Representative Warnock, Mr. Chairman, when we interpret this bill, the guidance that is provided by CDC and or the World Health Organization that is followed by the FAA or TSA that stipulates regulatory compliance for airports, that regulatory compliance is based on the guidance or recommendations from the CDC or World Health Organization, and that has supremacy over state law. So we have to follow those federal guidelines and be in violation of state law, or if we follow state law, be in violation of the federal regulatory compliance. I hope that answers your question.
Any follow-up, Representative Warnock?
So I just don't see the connection, how this would actually violate your ability to follow that regulation.
Mr. Brubaker, if you have any follow-up to that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Warnock, I'll do my best. The way we interpret this bill is that the basis for a decision to institute any mask, vaccine, or medical testing requirements would not be allowed to be based on CDC or World Health Organization requirements, mandates, recommendations, or guidance. If the FAA or TSA issue guidance for future pandemics or future medical emergencies, and the FAA implements regulatory compliance based on that, that would be in exact contradiction to the word or the language in this bill.
Representative Ward, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask if you're aware of any place in the Constitution that grants the right of the federal government to jurisdict over public health.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward, I think I'm a very qualified airport director, but not a constitutional scholar, so no.
So I would just mention that we have a clause to protect the general welfare in the Constitution, and I think that's what the courts have generally put public health under. So any other questions for Mr. Brubaker? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brubaker. I guess Ms. Cartwright will be our last one then. So Ms. Cartwright, please introduce yourself, and then you have the floor.
Good morning, excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jan Cartwright, representing the Wyoming Public Health Association. Quickly, the CDC defines public health as, quote, protecting and improving the health of people and their communities of entire populations. This bill language takes away a tool that public health officials use to achieve that goal in our state and our country, putting decades of science at risk to respond to hopefully a once in a century pandemic is very difficult, and I appreciate this discussion. The Wyoming Public Health Association does oppose this bill because of the ramifications to public health. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Ms. Cartwright? Seeing none, thank you. Lily, there's no one else online, is that correct? Yes. Okay, then we will close public comment. What is your pleasure, committee, on House Bill 143? Moved by Representative Ward, seconded by Representative Penn. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Trujillo.
I don't believe this is a judgment for the committee to make. This should go to the floor. This decision is for the state of Wyoming and needs to be heard and discussed within the state of Wyoming. My family was personally affected by these ridiculous mandates. My son got a COVID vaccine and his throat started to shut because his lymph nodes were swollen. This is 2 years later and he's still under doctor's care. My granddaughter has a speech impediment, and putting a mask on her face increased that speech impediment. I am for this bill 100% and it needs to go to the floor.
Any other comment on this side of committee? Otherwise, we'll move over here. Representative Penn, please.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to say that we're allowing our practices to be dictated sometimes against the will of the people based upon a level of trust that these entities have the best interest of the people in mind. And later we find that they don't, or that they got it wrong. This is a statement that the state will use its constitutional authority to make the right choices for Wyoming citizens. If we want to implement their recommendations, we can. But we do not recognize any superior jurisdiction to the sovereign choices of the state. I would urge an I vote, and I agree this does need to go to the floor. Thank you.
Any other discussions with the committee? Seeing none, Marilyn, please take the roll.
Representative Chadwick. Representative Klauston.
No.
Representative Hornock.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Penn.
Aye.
Representative Trujillo.
Aye.
Representative Ward.
Aye.
I'm not sure who to call next. Vice Chairman, no, Chairman Swanitzer
No.
and Vice Chairman Yin.
No.
Oh, let me see. Vote passes with 5 ayes or noes.
Thank you, everybody. So House Bill 143, I assume Representative Ward, you would carry this on the floor if we hear it? Okay. Mr. Chairman, would you like to take over or would you? Okay.
Representative, we have not done 233 yet, is that correct? Transportation and care of injured police dogs? Yes, sir. Welcome Representative Alaman to present 233. You have about 20 minutes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. It shouldn't take 20 minutes. This is a bill brought to me by a constituent, and that's why I'm here, is for my constituents. This is a real short bill, and I ask for your favorability on it. And all this bill does is if a working police dog is injured on duty, is injured, and there's an ambulance on site that a person does not need, the dog will be transported in that ambulance with medical care given to the dog by the personnel that would have took care of a person if it was needed. And he would be taken to the closest veterinarian. And that's pretty much all this bill says.
Questions, committee, Representative Hornock, go ahead, and then I'll go to Representative Yin after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's happening now?
Representative Alaman, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornock, nothing. The dog is transported by any means, but not by an ambulance. Or he also does not have medical attention by a professional.
Follow up, Representative Hornock, or, yep. go ahead.
Are they specifically somewhere not allowed to ride in the ambulance? Is there that language, or is it being vague right now? There's the chance that they may, based on the situational discretion or something like that. That's kind of, could you elaborate a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Hornock, to be very honest with you, there hasn't been a case yet. There's been 2 cases of police dogs dying. One was in a police car when it was 90 degrees out and his left, he did not need an ambulance. There was another case on I-80 during a drug search. A truck went thump thump over the dog. He did not need an ambulance. So to this point, this bill has never been needed. This is for the future.
Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Alaman, I like the concern, I guess. If the bill isn't solving a problem that currently exists, I'm a little hesitant, but maybe a question of why a police officer wouldn't just bring their dog as quickly as possible in the police car themselves.
Senator Alaman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin, this is just a precaution, maybe the police car was hit and is out of order, and an ambulance is there. And we got to keep in mind that if the ambulance is on site, and not needed for a person, it would be then directed to the dog. Air ambulances are not included.
There, okay, Representative Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Alaman, so to the best of your knowledge, they're not forbidden to do this now. They can, if they so choose, put the dog in the ambulance and bring them on.
Representative Allemand, if you know.
Mr. Zwaneker, Representative Chadwick, I don't know, but I don't think a hospital would really like a canine in their ambulance. There's probably going to have to be some special cleaning before they can go back out. And I don't know that.
Representative Chadwick, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So have you spoken with any law enforcement or emergency people who might be affected by this? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Representative Allemand.
Mr. Zwaneker, Representative Chadwick, I have not spoken to emergency. I have spoken to a couple police people who do use dogs. They like it. Of course they like it. But I have not spoken to any emergency people at all.
Oh, yep, go ahead.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And did they indicate that they would, let me see, that they've had instances where they couldn't? I'm a little lost for the genesis of this bill.
Representative Allemand, if you know.
Mr. Zwaneker, sir, Representative Chadwick, no, there has not in the past been a need for this bill. This bill is looking at the future just to take care of a problem, being a little proactive.
Okay, other questions, Representative Clauston, and then we'll go to Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a dog lover, had them my whole life, and we have a lot of money invested into these police dogs. I don't see a rush for this bill. And, you know, the other thing we've always talked about, it's $30,000 to $40,000 to implement a new law. By the time it goes into all the green books and all the work that goes into this. Before we approve this, would you be open to getting a little more information from hospitals on how they feel about it? And what kind of extra costs there would be if we had to transport a police dog?
And the Hospital Association is here in the back. Representative Allemand.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding was this was a constituent bill. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward. Yes, ma'am, it was. And I want to take care of my constituents. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Penn.
Oh, I'm already on. Thank you, Chairman. So with regards to the hospital, I would suspect that it would probably be going to a vet. Is that the case?
Representative Swanser.
So it would be veterinary clinics, not necessarily hospitals that we'd need to consult. But outside of that, my question is, the definition of ambulance, when you look it up in statute, includes land vehicles, but it actually does also include aircraft. You mentioned that this doesn't include aircraft, but I think that as this is written, it would. And so you know, I again, these dogs are expensive and you know, have a great deal to add, but I'm not so certain I'm comfortable with allowing them to go in a helicopter. So anyway, that might be something that I would consider amending if this moves forward. Do you have any comment?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Penn. Yeah, I do have a comment on that. If they were in an airplane or a helicopter, it would probably take them longer because the helicopter or airplane's not going to land at a vet clinic. So it's probably going to take them a little longer to get the dog there than if they put him in a vehicle.
Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Maybe a question of why only police dogs and not all dogs?
Well, Representative does say police dogs, fire dogs, and search and rescue dogs. And actually in the statute, we have 4 protected classes of animals. We did not include police horse in this law. Does that answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, if my dog got hit and an ambulance was right there, I mean, would it be okay for that ambulance to take my dog to the vet?
Question for the presenter,
Yeah, maybe for the presenter, if they would be open to opening it up to more dogs.
Representative Alaman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin. This bill covers police dogs. No, your dog's not available, sir. I'm sorry.
So this statute is the protected class of animals that if you injure or disable them, it's $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in jail. So these are specialized animals who have been trained, highly trained, lots of investment. Other questions for the presenter? Seeing none. Thank you, Representative Alaman.
Thank you.
Is there public comment on this bill? Hospital Association wish to weigh in. If you have ambulance services. Welcome, Mr. Bully.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Eric Bully with Wyoming Hospital Association. I do not represent the EMS Association, although I do work closely with them. And obviously, we're talking about any ambulance service here. So there are some that are attached to hospitals. There are also some private EMS services around the state. I think we need to have some clear expectations. What would our paramedics, our EMTs be expected to do if we do accept a dog in the ambulance? We do decontaminate the ambulances after each run. I think I have some questions about who would be responsible for paying the bill to transport the dog to a veterinary clinic. The other thing to consider is in a lot of our rural communities, there's one ambulance. If that ambulance is out on a traffic call or wherever this may happen, and there's another call, are we going to put the needs of the dog ahead of another citizen? How far is the transportation expected to take the dog to find the next veterinary clinic? It may take them out of a service area. I just think there's a lot of unintended consequences. I think these dogs are incredible in the work that they do. I just think that we might need to think this through a little bit more before we pass legislation. And I think it would be good to get the EMS Association to weigh in on this. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
And it does provide in the bill, Mr. Bully, what EMS can provide, including administering opiate antagonists and giving mouth to snout.
Mouth to snout, Mr. Chairman. Don't sign me up.
Other questions, brother?
About the bust. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would argue that these dogs are probably cleaner than some of the humans that we transport. And right, very well trained. Just, I'm not comfortable with the bill until maybe it has a little bit more. Yeah. The question would be, who else should we involve in this bill before we work it a little bit more? So hospitals, EMS, the police, any other ideas who we should involve?
Mr. Bully.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. It's not fair. It's a great way to end the last week of committee of the whole, the committee hearings for this first. Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I think it might be good to get veterinarians involved as well. And I think if we start down this path, it might be good to have the EMS Association talk to them about potentially supplies that they may have on hand if we start doing this. So,
any other questions for the hospitals? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Bullock.
Thank you, Mr.
Certainly
Chairman.
appreciate it. Don't see anyone online. Any other public comment on the bill? Nope, seeing none. We'll close. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 233? Moved by Representative Ward. Seconded by Representative Penn. Any amendments? Anybody want to add police force as the other protected animal class? I don't think so either. All right, seeing none, no amendments, no discussion. Marilyn, if you'd call the roll on House Bill 233.
Representative Chadwick,
No.
Representative Klauston,
No.
Representative Hornock,
No.
Representative O'Hearn,
No.
Representative Penn,
No.
Representative Trujillo,
No.
Representative Ward,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
No.
and Chairman Swanitzer.
Aye. Sorry, Representative Alaman, that bill didn't make it this year, but yep, appreciate your time. Committee, we currently do not have any Senate files scheduled for Monday, and I believe there will be an ask from the three chairmen to perhaps start earlier for general file on Monday morning and not have a Labor Health Committee meeting Monday, but I'll let you know as soon as possible. But I'm optimistic we might just cancel all three House committee meetings and go right into general file at 8 o'clock. So, but I'll let you know if that's not the case. And if you hear some Senate files get read in today, anything goes to our committee, we'll probably hear Monday. With that, we're halfway through the session day.